Today we want to talk about supply and demand. If you'll remember, what we were talking about last time was that production possibilities frontier, and I ended that discussion up by talking about these questions that every society must answer. What goods will be produced, how will those goods be produced, and for whom will the goods be produced? Who gets the things that we're producing? And in the United States, most of the answers to those questions are, well, we don't have a national answer. We leave that up to each person. And so in the United States, those decisions about what will be produced and how will it be produced and who will receive it, we just leave that up to the marketplace. And by the marketplace, we really just mean people, buyers and sellers, just coming together and interacting with each other. That's the policy in the United States for the most part. There's some government production, there's some non-market decisions that are made, of course, and the government part of the economy is maybe on the order of it depends on how you measure this stuff, but on the order of 20, 30, 40, not 40%, 20, 30, 35%. Okay? Anyway, so we let consumers decide what goods will be produced. Right? Well, the producers make the decision what to produce, that they produce for the benefit of consumers. We let those business managers decide how will the goods be produced. They can produce it with labor or capital or however they would like. And then who will receive the goods, that's just a matter of who's willing to pay the most for them. So in the United States economy, those decisions are answered that way in the marketplace. What do we mean by a market? First of all, let me tell you what a market is not, or what I do not mean when I say market. I do not mean some sort of square downtown where everybody comes to buy and sell things. I don't mean a shopping mall or some central location. I don't mean that at all. I mean by a market, it's all buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. A market it's really a collection of people. And the collection of people, some people are buying and some people are selling, but the market is made up of those people. So, where are they located? And the answer is, I don't know, they could be located anywhere. In this room, there's a market meeting taking place right now. There's somebody selling economics, and there's some people buying economics, so we're right here. But the market for economics extends beyond this room. There's an economics class meeting next door, and there are economics classes meeting in the college across town, and economics classes meeting in different towns. And so the market for economics is not just confined to this specific location. Okay? So don't think of it as a place, think of it as people. And if you decide not to buy your economics here, then you can pick up and go next door. And I'm not inviting you to. I'm just saying the market encompasses you going next door or you going to another college and so forth. Okay? Market exchanges are voluntary. So people trade in the marketplace because they want to. You may not be happy about the deal you're getting, but you can always just say, no, I don't want that deal. If you don't like it, you know, that's always one of the choices you have. And that being the case, by having these exchanges voluntary, by giving you the right to always say, no, I don't want to trade, then what you can do is you can prevent yourself from getting in those trades that actually hurt you. Right? These are positive sum exchanges, by which I mean both sides expect to gain. This term is maybe a little bit new to you, and that's part of the reason I wrote it up here, was to introduce you to this term, positive sum. Think about a card game for just a second. Maybe we're playing poker, 4 of us sit down at the table. Maybe each one of us starts off with $10, and then we start playing cards. And we start off, each one of us with $10, there's 4 of us, there's $40 at the table. And now we start playing cards, and basically what happens is that $40 just shifts across the table, back and forth, as the card game goes on. That would be called a zero-sum game. One person's gains equal another person's losses, and since the gains and the losses are offset by each other, then overall there's no money being sort of added to the table, and there's nothing being lost. The positives and the negatives, the gains and the losses offset. That would be a zero-sum game. A negative-sum game would be one if we were playing a game and let's say every hour a dollar evaporated into the air. We start off the evening playing cards and there's $40 at the table, and every hour a dollar evaporates. We don't see it go, it just goes. And at the end of the evening maybe there's only $35 at the table. And if that were the case, and I know it's not, but if it were, that would be a negative-sum game. The transaction, the interaction between us is something that in the end we all lose one way or another. But with a positive-sum game, what happens, or a positive-sum transaction, is that it's sort of like 1 + 1 = 3. And trade is a positive-sum exchange, or trading with people is a positive-sum experience, because what happens is both parties expect a benefit. You start off with a certain amount of, let's say, satisfaction or wealth or whatever, and by the end of the trade you have more than before. Let me give you an example. I think I maybe mentioned it before, but just to give you an example, let's say that I have a TV set I want to trade, and you mow lawns for people, and I say to you, hey, if you'll come and mow my lawn for 2 months, I'll give you my TV set. And you say, yeah, I'd like to have a TV set. I've just got this crummy one. It doesn't do a good job. It's black and white, not color, and so on. So that'd be great. So we do a deal here. We shake hands on it. You mow my lawn for 2 months, just like you said you would. I give you the TV set, just like I said I would. Is this a zero-sum game? Is it a negative-sum game? I say it's a positive-sum game, and here's why. I voluntarily gave up my TV set to have the yard mowed for 2 months. I wanted to do that. Nobody forced me to do it. I was thinking in my own head, hey, having the yard mowed for 2 months, that's more valuable to me than having this TV set. I've got an extra TV set. I was just going to sell it in a garage sale or something. I don't need it very much. And so to get my yard mowed for 2 months, that's a wonderful thing. I'm happy. I'm better off than I started. On your side of the transaction, what you're thinking is, well, you know, I mow yards all day long. It's no big deal. I come over and mow this guy's yard. It takes me a half hour. I do it for a couple months. He gives me a TV set. It's a good TV set. It's color TV, got a good picture and so forth. This is a good thing. I came out ahead on this deal. In a voluntary trade, you can always back out if you think it's not going to help you. You wouldn't say, I don't want that TV set, but I'll do it. If you don't want the TV set, what you say is, I won't do it. So in this kind of a deal where I benefit, you benefit, it's a positive-sum game. We both, as a result of this transaction between us, we both come out ahead, and society is better off for it. Now, I'm telling you that that's what happens in every market transaction, is people, let me be careful here, the word expect is there. People expect to benefit from every market transaction they're involved in. Now, sometimes we get something we don't expect. Maybe you get this TV set from me and you get home and you plug it in and it doesn't work. Okay, of course you ought to find out about that pretty early on and stop mowing my yard. But the point is that could happen, and I might be a bad guy and just say, well, that's too bad for you. You still owe me 2 months of mowing my lawn. Now, you may not do it. I don't know whether you will or not. But the point is that that can happen. Or I could be a fraud. I could just give you this box that looks like a TV set and it could be empty inside. Or you could be kind of bad on your end of the deal, too. You could come over and act like you're mowing the yard, but just sort of do it in a haphazard way and just be gone in a few minutes, and I'm not satisfied. That can happen, but the point is that going into every single transaction, everyone, both parties expect to come out ahead. And usually they do. Think about this. It is possible to have some fraud or deception or whatever creep into a transaction, but most transactions, what we see, or I shouldn't say most, a lot of transactions are repeat purchases. For example, I buy a Pepsi today, I buy a Pepsi tomorrow, I buy a Pepsi the next day, and the next day, and the next day. These are repeat purchases. If there was something about Pepsi where that they tricked me, I thought this was going to be some magic elixir that was going to prolong my life and make me good looking and so forth, but it didn't do that, then I wouldn't buy it the next day. You're thinking I need some of that Pepsi, aren't you? I was thinking I needed some too. Anyway, we wouldn't go back the next day. If you go to a famous bar and you buy some clothes from them and they get home and just, you know, the first time you put them in the washing machine, they just like fall into threads on the floor and they are not durable, then you don't go back to famous bar. And so the point is that we can be tricked, but what happens is we do a lot of our business with the same people we did business with yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. And so usually what happens is we're not tricked. We're pretty familiar with what we're getting and we're happy with it. Now, the reason I make a big deal about this, the voluntary nature of the transactions means that we're involved in a positive sum experience or a positive sum transaction where both parties benefit. Think for just one moment how many transactions there are in the United States. Right? Because, I mean, in one day, you might do something like buy some clothes, buy some supplies for school, buy a little bit of gasoline for your car. Yeah, I got something in my eye. Rent a movie from Blockbuster. Go to the store, do a little bit of shopping for groceries. I mean, in one day, you may easily do 10 or 20 transactions. Multiply that by the number of people in the United States. Hundreds of millions, what, 270 million people? So all these transactions by all those people, and we're thinking that most all of them create value, each one of these transactions. We start off with a TV set being held by somebody that doesn't even appreciate it, and at the end of the transaction, we've got a TV set by somebody that appreciates it a lot more. That's a benefit. Society became wealthier, and I'm saying that happens hundreds of millions of times a day. That's a wonderful thing. We've got an economy that can produce value just seemingly from nowhere. When we're talking about markets, we put everybody into three categories. They're either buyers, they are sellers, or they're neither. And if they're neither, we ignore them. Everybody in a market is either a buyer or a seller or neither one, which really means they're not in the market. They're just incidental. Who cares? Okay? So the market is made up of those two sides to the marketplace. The behavior of buyers we'll talk about first. Their behavior is described by something called the law of demand. The behavior of buyers is described by the law of demand. I think I've already talked about this before too. Law of demand. The law of demand says this: as the price of a good goes up, let's say rises, the quantity of that good demanded by, let me say this slightly different, the quantity demanded of that good declines. And vice versa. What we're dealing with here is really sort of a cause and effect. If the price changes, that's our cause. If the price of the good changes, then the effect of that will be on quantity demanded, a higher price, a lower quantity demanded. And it says here vice versa. By vice versa, if the price of the good went down, people will buy more of it. Quantity demanded would increase. Okay, so there's our law of demand. This is really It's not a universal truth. What this is a theory that economists developed this theory and then went out and started looking for evidence, and the evidence they found time after time after time. Different countries, different people, different goods. What they found out over and over was that this theory gets the support of actual experience. People do behave this way time after time, and after people behave that way enough and we got enough evidence of it, then all of a sudden this theory just got called a law. Like, it's got to be this way. It doesn't really have to be that way, but it almost always is. And it's sort of like gravity. You know, if you get into outer space and you drop something, it won't necessarily go down. It may go up or to the side. And so gravity isn't a universal truth. It's just, normally that's the way the world works. Well, normally the world works this way, the law of demand says. This theory of demand is generally going to be accurate. Okay? Higher price, smaller quantity demanded. If tuition at SMS were doubled, there would be fewer people in this room. The law of demand tells me so. I don't have to go around and do a survey. The law of demand works in time after time after time. That being the case, I predict it's going to work with this class. If we would double the price of taking this class, there would be fewer people in this room. Maybe nobody in the room. But the point is, there would be fewer. If the price of ice cream went up from $1 a scoop to $2 a scoop, people would buy less ice cream. And so on all the way down the list. And vice versa. Let's draw a diagram or a graph to show this relationship. We'll talk about some mythical good, good X. And we'll put the price of good X on the vertical axis of my diagram, and we'll put the quantity of good X on the horizontal axis. And this downward sloping line that I've just drawn, we'll call that a demand curve. Now, so for a demand curve, we'll have something like this. Let's say the price of a good starts off at $1 per unit. We'll start at that $1, we'll come over to the curve and down and say, oh, look, people will buy 50 units, whatever these units are, good X. Let's say that we start off at that point. I'll call it point A just for convenience. I'm saying with the law of demand, if the price of this good goes up to $1.50, the law of demand says people will buy less. And there's a point B on the demand curve where we show that. In this particular case, if the price goes up from $1 to $1.50, the quantity demanded of X goes down from 50 to 20. So quantity demanded declines when price increases, and vice versa. It would go the other direction too. If we started off with $1.50 price and people are buying 20 units, price goes down, people will buy more units. Questions about this? It's pretty straightforward. I think it describes something you've all experienced. I mean, I know when I'm at the store or something like that, I say, how much? And if they say a number that is a little bit distasteful to me, then I say, I'll just kind of pass on that. And if we've all experienced that, and I think we have, then we've all experienced this law of demand. Maybe we weren't thinking about putting a name on it, but that's the behavior that people do. Now, why would people behave this way? And the answer is self-interest. Just self-interest, that's all. If, let's say that the price of something starts off, let me use a different example, not just this good X, but let's say that you're looking at a car to buy, and that car costs $20,000. And you might say, oh man, $20,000, I don't know. I'm just at the point where I'm willing to buy it, but that's a little bit more than I want to spend. I don't know. I just can't decide. Let's say you start off that way. And then they come along and they say, okay, I'll sell you this car for $18,000. Now, here's what you're thinking. A moment ago it was going to cost me $20,000, and not just the money, but it's the things I could have bought with that money. That's its opportunity cost. But I was thinking about handing over $20,000 to get this car, and I just couldn't decide. But now, for that same $20,000, I can get the car plus $2,000 worth of other stuff. because they're going to basically not charge you $20,000. Now they're only going to charge $18,000. You got $2,000 left over to get something else. And so the point is that when the price went down, you find out that you can buy more stuff now. Your purchasing power is greater. And so you've got an incentive to go ahead and buy more the lower that price is, because you get more for your money. The value that you're getting for your dollar is going up, so we buy more if the price goes down. If the price goes up, the sacrifice you have to make, the more of the other goods and services you have to do with that, that's going up if the price rises. And so you have an incentive. I don't think that that new car is worth that to me. I have to give up too many things for it. There's something called the substitution effect. The substitution effect of a price increase. Here's what the substitution effect says. It says, if the price of a good goes up, consumers tend to buy less of that good and substitute in its place other goods. If the price of a good goes up, people tend to buy less of that good and substitute other goods in its place. So for example, let's say that a hamburger costs $1 and you're buying, I don't know, 3 hamburgers a week, and all of a sudden the price of hamburger goes up to $1.50, you might say, no more hamburgers for me, now I'm going to eat cashew chicken. If the price of a good goes up, you buy less of that good, you substitute other goods in its place. Now, are there goods that don't have substitutes? Not very many. I mean, it's hard to come up with a good that doesn't have a substitute. Certainly, you know, hamburgers, you can substitute for those. Cars, you can substitute. You know, a motorcycle will substitute for a car, or a, rapid transit, a bus, or a subway, or an airplane. There's substitutes for just about everything. And so this substitution effect is telling us, man, if the price goes up, I'll do without it. I'll take something else in its place. Okay, so anyway, here's our law of demand. Let's talk about the law of supply. This is our description of how sellers behave. As the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of that good increases, and vice versa. And again, we're dealing with a cause and effect relationship here. Price changes, that's the cause, and then the effect is people react to that. Suppliers react to it. If the price changes, it causes suppliers to react. And we've got, what, a higher price, an increase in quantity supplied. And by the way, I didn't use the term before. Let me just kind of add that to the discussion. Here what we have is a positive or direct relationship between price and quantity. That is to say, a higher price causes quantity supplied to go up. In our previous case, what we had is a negative, I say our previous case, the law of demand, or inverse relationship. And I'm only telling you that to get the terminology straight. And what we said there was if price goes up, quantity demanded went down. So those two variables move in the opposite direction. Okay? Are you comfortable with that terminology? Cause and effect, price changes, suppliers react. You may not think of things too much this way. Most of us are buyers. You know, most of us, most of the time, buy rather than sell things. And that being the case, and it's kind of easy to identify with this, I think that a lot of people have a different opinion, though, about suppliers. They are thinking about, let's think about a grocery store as a supplier. I think most people are thinking, at a grocery store, they just set the price, whatever price they want. And so our view of suppliers may be more in terms of they fix prices rather than, well, they are just at the mercy of prices. Prices go up and down and they have to just react to that. Maybe we don't see that so much. They see it that way, the suppliers of things. They're always thinking about, oh man, the market's going against me here and the price is going down, and so what am I going to do? They see their own life in those terms, but maybe we don't. Anyway, again, we're assuming that people are self-interested. That's what I said before. Why do people behave the way the law of demand says? Self-interest. Well, why do people behave the way the law of supply says? And the answer again is self-interest. If you can make $1 profit from doing something, maybe you'll do that. But what if you can make $2 profit from doing the same thing? Well, you'll for sure do it now, and maybe even more. And what if you could make $3 profit from that same activity? Well, maybe do even more of it. Let's draw a diagram. I've got a little room here. Quantity of X, price of X. Here's our supply curve is a positively sloped curve. It's going up to the right. And what this is telling us is if the price rises, let's start off with a price of, I don't know, well, $1 is good enough. And maybe this supplier produces 30 units of the good at $1. If the price goes up, let's say to $2, maybe the supplier sells or offers for sale 70 units of the good. We've got this like as before, point A and B. There's a positive relationship between these variables, higher prices associated with a greater quantity supplied. Again, it's self-interest. The supplier is thinking, this is in my interest. Now that the price has gone up, it's in my interest to produce more of this. Maybe you've got maybe you own a farm and you've got a wheat field out here and you're growing a certain amount of wheat. But the price is not great. It's just okay. So you go out there and grow the wheat. But then maybe the price of wheat doubles. Then you start thinking about, wow, I could get an early crop of wheat, you know, some winter wheat. And then if I work pretty good during the middle of the summer, I can harvest that, and not summer so much as spring, late spring. I can harvest that and I could get some more seed in the ground and I can have a second crop. Or I can put a little fertilizer out on this and get me a little bit better crop. Or I can do whatever. As soon as the price starts going up, we start thinking about, how can I cash in on this situation? The price is going up. I don't want to just keep on acting the same way. Now I want to work even harder now that I'm making a bigger profit on each unit. So there's an incentive there, and I don't think I've used that term before, but price is an incentive or a reward for behaving in certain ways. And here for this supplier, price is a positive incentive. It says, do more of this. It's more rewarding now. And so people do more. In the case before, price was an incentive to do less. Price was the cost of consuming a good, and the incentive was, man, don't buy as much of that stuff when the price goes up. You have to sacrifice more in order to get the good. Gee, I wonder what you would get if you brought the demand curve together with the supply curve. I know what you get. You get supply and demand. And by the way, this is the total market supply which is equal to the supply of all sellers. This is not just the supply by one person, but the supply by everybody. And the demand, this is the total market demand, equals the demand of all buyers. We add those together. Now we've got these two curves drawn. What we want to do is just pick a price, and why don't you pick one like I am here? Pick a price that's kind of high up in your diagram. Say the price of the good is, I don't know, $2. What we'll do is we'll come across here from this $2 and we'll ask about the behavior of these two groups of people. If the price is $2, the demand curve tells us how much buyers want to buy. The demand curve says, gosh, I'd like to buy, I don't know, 10 units. And these quantities are just hypothetical, and the prices are too, so don't worry about the number of units. But the buyer says, I want to buy a certain number of units at a price of $2. We started off at the $2 price and then went across to the demand curve and down to here. But at a price of $2, the supplier says, I'd like to sell, I don't know, 70 units. So at this price of $2, we have a surplus. The surplus is 60 units, isn't it? 70 units being offered for sale, 10 units being purchased and consumed. We have a surplus of this good. What happens when stores have a surplus of about anything? They have a sale, right? I always wait to buy things on sale. Don't always, but I try to. So I try to buy things that are out of favor, that nobody wants. So I got these clothes. Surplus. If out at the famous bar they've got more shoes on sale than people want to buy, they just say, man, we've had these shoes here for months. There's nobody buying them. They say, let's put up a sign that says 25% off. And that 25% off, they lower the price. So if we start off at a price in this example of $2, and we end up observing a surplus, we don't know if we're going to get a surplus going into this. And here's the thing, is we in this class, we economists, we know about supply and demand. But out in the real world, all you've got is like shoes. And you're trying to sell shoes, and you don't know where these supply and demand curves are. Maybe you know that they are out there somewhere, but you don't know where they touch each other, intersect. You don't know what their shape is. All you know is, hey, I've been trying to sell something for a certain price, and I can't sell it. I got a surplus. So you put it on sale, and the price starts going down. And if the price goes down to, let's say, right here, just a little bit, what we observe is, well, there's a smaller surplus, but there's still a surplus. Quantity supplied is still greater than quantity demanded. And so time to have another sale. 25% off wasn't enough. And we lower the price again and again and again. What we're trying to do, we don't know about these curves. We don't know where they are. We don't know if they exist. But here's what we know, is that as long as we've got a surplus, the price is too high. That's what the seller knows. The price is too high, I'll lower the price. And finally, that seller lowers the price down to right here. Let's say $1.27. And at $1.27, buyers would like to buy, I'll just pick out a number of units here, 54 units. The demand curve tells us that at a price of $1.27, buyers would like to buy 54 units. The supply curve tells us that at that price of $1.27, sellers would like to sell 54 units. So what we have at this situation is quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. We'll come back and talk about it more, but I want to make it real clear to you what I did not say here. I did not say demand equals supply. The way I'm using a specific term here, quantity demanded and quantity supplied. And I'll come back and we'll talk about why that is later on, but that's the terminology we're using. Quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, and what we say is the market, well, let me not put it that way, let me say this. This is the equilibrium price. The equilibrium price is the price where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. This price of $2, these prices above $1.27, any of them, those were not an equilibrium price. Here's what I mean by an equilibrium. Once you get to that price, the price doesn't have any tendency to change away from there. But when we got to a price of $2 to begin with, that was not an equilibrium. There was a tendency for a price to change. When we got a price of $2, there was a surplus. And the tendency was for the sellers to lower the price. And so this can't be an equilibrium. And no price can be an equilibrium if quantity supplied and quantity demanded aren't equal. So it's when these two things are brought into equality that we say there's an equilibrium. This price could last. If it's $1.27, is there a reason for the price to go up? I don't think so. What would it be? Buyers want to buy 54 units, sellers want to sell 54 units. The behavior of one group is consistent with the behavior of the other group. This is an equilibrium for the market. We could have done exactly the same thing. Let me erase a few of these lines out of here. We could have done the same thing if we started off at a lower price. Let's start our example off at some price of $1. We'll leave $1.27 there. We'll be back. $1 price. What we observe now is quantity demanded is large, 81 units. Quantity supplied is small, 19 units. What do we have now? Quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. What do you think we call this? Shortage, that's right. People want to buy a lot, and there's just not enough available. Quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied at that price. Okay, now put yourself in the position of your store manager. You're selling some product. You put a price of $1 on it, and there's just people standing in line to get it. You say, $1, how much do you want? And we got 27 units, or no, what would it be? We got 19 units for sale, and there's 81 people standing in line. What you have there, of course, is a shortage, but what would you do if you're the store owner? You say, man, I got 81 people standing in line to buy 19 units. All I've got is 19 units. I think I could sell all 19 of those, even if I was charging $1.10. So you raise the price a little bit. And at a higher price, sure enough, people don't want to buy as many, but they still want to buy more than you're offering for sale, you and the other suppliers. But the shortage is a little bit smaller at this higher price. And so then you say, but there's still a shortage. Why don't I raise the price again and again and again? And finally you raise it to the point where it's $1.27. And now quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. We have reached an equilibrium. Now, here's what we have seen at this point. I'm not pretending for one moment that anybody knows where these diagrams are for, or the supply and demand curves are for good X. I'm not saying anybody's got to know. I'm saying in complete ignorance of this, if somebody just like picks a price, you know, they're not looking at the diagram, they pick a price, and if that happened not to be the equilibrium price, they'll find out that there's either a shortage or a surplus. And that shortage or surplus will make itself obvious to everybody who watches. I say obvious. If you're there managing that store, it's supposed to be obvious to you. That's what you're supposed to be paying attention to. You're supposed to say, oh man, I put that price up there and you know, we're not selling very much. I was kind of disappointed. And then you're supposed to think, what can I do to get rid of that surplus? I'll lower the price a little bit. If you're the manager of the store and you put out 19 items and there's 81 people standing in line, you're supposed to be thinking, you know, we could all be doing better here. We on the supplier side of the market, we could be doing better. Why don't we raise our price a little bit? we're just giving this stuff away. And so you raise the price. And so what I'm saying is, in complete ignorance of where the equilibrium is, if you pick a price that's not at equilibrium, and then you just do the obvious thing, if you've got a surplus, lower price. If you've got a shortage, raise it. You will automatically work your way to $1.27 without even knowing that $1.27 is the equilibrium price. You just find your way there. And I'm making this where it's, you know, sort of real simple and easy, and maybe in reality it's difficult to know if the equilibrium price is $1.30 or $1.25 or whatever. But I'm saying that you're going to work your price, work the price up in the direction of the equilibrium. You know, this is kind of a neat deal, and you may not think of it in these terms, but I do. I'm not thinking of it so much as a participant, a person who's buying and selling, as somebody who stands back and observes. And I find this kind of an interesting thing. We've got two different groups here. We've got buyers and we've got sellers, and they're just totally different people with totally different interests. Don't really care anything about the other one. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there's no requirement here that they care about the other one. They're just looking out for themselves. And what happened was that the behavior of these two individuals, these two groups, the behavior of those two groups are brought into some sort of consistency in the marketplace. What the suppliers want to sell is equal to what the buyers want to buy. And you might think, well, these people, they got totally different interests. They're going off in different directions. We'll never find any way of getting agreement between them. But they agreed on $1.27. They agreed on this quantity that gets traded, and we didn't even talk about that quantity, but that equilibrium quantity, they both agreed on that quantity. What we've got here is this marketplace where there's voluntary buying and selling. We found a way to bring the behavior of different groups sort of into some consistency where there's agreement rather than conflict about what's going on in the marketplace, about the production and allocation of these goods. Okay, any questions about this? This is really a big deal. Big deal. Understanding this idea of equilibrium in the marketplace. I've got this picture sort of in my mind. I'm not always looking at the picture, but I've got this in my mind when I'm thinking about how markets operate. Supply and demand is really, it was developed to help us understand pricing, how prices occur in our economy. I had a nephew several years back, and he was visiting my parents, and I was sitting out on the front porch with him one day, and I thought, I'm going to see if I can teach this kid supply and demand. And he was like 6 years old, 7 years old, but not very old. And so I just sat there and started asking him questions. You know, would you buy more ice cream or less ice cream if the price went up, and this kind of stuff. And every time he would give me the right answer, I'd give him a quarter. This was kind of expensive on me before all was said and done, but because I gave him a lot of quarters. But I would sort of talk to him there, and then I'd ask him a question, and then if he was right, I gave him a quarter. And then if he's right, I gave him another quarter. And, you know, he was pretty smart to begin with, but for all these quarters, then he was even smarter. And after a while, then we switched over to the supply side of the market, and I drew him a little graph, you know, and yeah, he could figure out that graph. Not right away, but he could with the quarters coming and us talking about it. And after a while, I got the supply and demand curves together, and then we got this equilibrium price. He caught on to it great. But, you know, for a long time in history, economists did not understand, not only economists, but anybody else, did not understand what's determining the price of something. And so that was the confusion about the pricing that caused people to think about this and caused them to develop these economic models, and then before you know, we got some answers. Let me just mention to you one or two things that people have said in history. Karl Marx, who you may or may not know much about, but Karl Marx, who wrote about socialism and communism, he, among other people, he believed in something called the labor theory of value. He said, you know, something's got value because it was produced by labor. Now, I don't agree with this, and something I haven't put up, the things I put up here don't agree with it, but Karl Marx, I'm saying, was worried about or interested in the same thing that we are right here. He was trying to figure out, what is it that determines the value of something? I've told you here what determines the value of something: supply and demand. But Karl Marx, he said, and again some other economists said the same thing, he said the value of something is determined by the labor that goes into it. If you've got two different things, and the one thing, it takes 1 hour to produce, 1 hour of working, and this thing takes 2 hours to produce, 2 hours of working, then the thing that takes 2 hours to produce is twice as valuable as the thing that takes 1 hour to produce. There's the theory of value I'm working with is it's based on labor. Okay? Now, later on, there were some other guys, and we won't get into their names and so forth because this is not a class into the history of economic theory, but there were some other people that came along and they said, oh, here's what I think. I think how useful something is, that's what determines its value. They said something like this. Look, we don't really have time to get into these long stories. They thought that the value of something, sorry, I won't get into that story. They thought the value of something was based on its usefulness, though, or our desire for it, or our demand for it. And so what you've got is some people that are sort of arguing that it's the amount of labor or effort or whatever that goes into producing it, that's what determines value. Somebody else says it's how desirable we find this, that's what determines value. And then a guy came along named Alfred Marshall. And I don't know what year he said this, but about 1900, I'm going to say 1908, more or less, I'm not exactly sure. But sometime in about there, he came onto the scene, and he had seen what these other people were saying, the Karl Marx approach and this other approach that says the value of something is determined by how much we desire it, the strength of our desire, or the usefulness of the good. Alfred Marshall came along and said, look, this is really just, you're both wrong and you're both right. There's some of you who think the value is determined by the labor that goes into it. There's other people who, and by the way, that really just comes back to the supply curve, the difficulty of producing or supplying the good. There's others who think it's based on the usefulness of the product or our demand for it. It's not either one, it's both put together. There is a supply side of the story, the amount of labor that goes into it and other resources, but there's also a demand side to the story. And he said, you know, imagine if somebody asked you, said, what blade of the scissors cuts paper? If you've got paper, you know, you can cut that with scissors. Which blade of the scissors does the cutting? Is it the top blade or is it the bottom one? And Alfred Marshall said, it's neither one, it's the two blades together. And so he said, in the same way, if you want to know what determines the price of a product, it's not the supply of the product. It's not just supply kind of things, like the amount of labor that went into the good. And he said it's not just the demand for the good either, or the usefulness of the good. It's those two blades of the scissors working together. Both supply and demand determine the market price in combination. Finally, here's what we're going to talk about next time. We're going to talk about what could cause that price to go up or go down. We see supply and demand here, but will the price ever change? And the answer is the price will change if these curves move. And what we're going to talk about next time is shifts in supply or in demand. I'll see you then.